Hello to everyone. My name is Melius Michael. I am one of the credible specialists for Pearson. I've been working with them since 2015 on changes that we've had in qualifications. I'm also an acting maths teacher, both A-level as well as GCSE, and I'm also an assistant head teacher at one of the schools in Birmingham in the UK. This course here is an introductory. Sorry, I'm just going to ask if we all mute ourselves as well as we come in, so that we stop any. Just mute. Sorry. There we go. So this course here for the international A level is an introductory course. So we are introducing the modules, the choices that you have, a few things to consider about the delivery of the qualification, a few reference to the assessment and how that works. We have three activities throughout the session that in order to participate with the activities, you would need to download the resources. Those can be found through the Zoom menu as well, and you can download them. We need the delegate booklet, if you haven't, which has the resources in them. This one here looks like this. It's a Word document. I'll just put that on the screen for a second before I carry on with the presentation. So it's a delegate booklet like this, and it will have the activities which I'll refer to. As well as the delegate booklet, you'll also need the specification for both the international GCSE as well as the international A-level. Those are two PDFs as well in the resources section. So if I just share that on the screen here, so you'll have the specification, this one here, as well as the international A-level as well. So there'll be references to these as well as an activity that will require you to go through that later on in the session here. Apologies if anyone is aware of this, of the structure of the qualification, but this first module out of the two that I am delivering, we'll go into that. So if I look at the agenda right now in a bit more detail. So in this case, so you can see here, we've got, we're going to refer to how mathematics units are combined to make the A-levels. Some teaching issues that we should be aware of from experience and from what other schools or teachers share with us throughout every school that uses our qualification. Assessing Edexcel International A-level, how does that work within the examiners, as well as how you can also, which modules you can cash in together. And then finally, for today, I'll mention some support that Pearson Edexcel offers in both terms of actually delivering the qualification, as well as analyzing your results after after the students have sat the exams and the results are out. And then there'll be an opportunity for a Q&A at the end. At any point, if you want to if you want to ask any questions in the chat, so feel free to use that. We'll try and answer them during the session. If not, there'll be a Q&A at the end. And as well, there is also an email that you can email the team for any queries that I haven't answered or I have missed throughout this session here. And one of the credible specialists, will then refer back to you as well. If you just bear with me for 1 second, I'm just going to, again, ask for everyone to make sure we mute the chats. There we go. And then I'll carry on as well. Okay. Right. So I was just sorting a few of the mute issues as well, so we don't have any background noises. So to carry on, if we make a start, just a bit, some of the objectives for today's session, and that is to gain an understanding about how the qualifications are devised. Then, sorry, I just need to make sure people, if we could just make sure we don't unmute ourselves throughout this. Thank you. To understand the content of the qualification, understand how to plan the course and lessons as well. To understand the assessment of the qualification and how to prepare students, understand different support that is available from Pearson, and as well as create a network for to share ideas between teachers. So that there's an opportunity throughout the session where you can drop some ideas within the chat. And of course, at the end, if you want to mute yourselves and ask the questions as well, you may do that as well. So to make a start, just to welcome you on behalf of Pearson and just give you a bit of a background of the company as well as and what we offer. So this is one of the world's leading learning companies, and it's the UK's largest awarding organization as well. Best place to provider for qualifications, which is aligned to the British educational system. Our international heritage stretches back to over 150 years, and today we partner with schools, universities, and employers worldwide, offering world-class, global, recognized qualifications to over 3.5 million students a year. And you can see here as well the number of schools that we partner, and as well as how many exams scripts they mark every year. So that's on the side there. You can see we operate in 70 countries worldwide, and therefore opportunities like the one today allow people to network between teachers across the world, and that's something we'd like to offer as well. Now, if I go into the international A-level maths qualification, I just want to again mention that this is an introductory course. So just giving you an outline of the structure and some recommendations for some of the concerns that involve upon the delivery of this. For the international A-level mathematics, if you go onto the qualification website, there are different resources as well as different modules that you can refer to. Some of this will be mentioned in today's session. You can see them on the screen, and some of them will be shared with you or explored, I would say, within other training sessions later on in the year. Usually those are in January, June, and in October. And you can see some of them here. So you can read about the different features, different modules that you can have here, but there'll be training as well offered for different parts of this that you, as mentioned. So some of it explores the different modules as well as the combinations, and also some of them go into more depth about the delivery, some of the misconceptions behind the topics that you should be aware of upon delivery of the qualification. When we look at the actual modules that can be put together for the international maths qualification, we've got the following here. That's 14 units, and there's a variety of choice that we offer. Each unit is 1/6 of an A-level and 1/3 of an AS. And I'll talk about how you can combine the different modules to cash in for the international A-level later on within this module here. But that's just an overview here of the different modules that you can choose for your students. And there's a variety of different schools will choose different options based on the experience of the teachers, the strengths of the students, as well as the strengths of the teachers as well. And also sometimes the support and resources that are available to them. There is also, so if we look at this one here, there's 4 pure units. So if we look at it a bit more in depth here, the 4 pure units are compulsory, so you'd have to teach, and they'll have to sit all 4 of them. And then there's 2 applied units that they can choose from. For large centers, it allows specialization into mechanics sets and statistics sets. You should just be aware that all units are equally weighted, so there's not an advantage in terms of which one you choose. The full course can be treated as a unitary one, with all units taken at the end as well. So there is that option as well, where you could do it at the end of the 2-year course, or you can do it as a unitized course. For example, the P1 taken in January of year 1 of a 2-year course, let's say. So you have that choice to do it, and you again, if what fits better with your school, with your students that you have in front of you as well. And like it says at the bottom of the screen, each unit is assessed by a 90-minute, 75-mark exam. So again, that's something to bear in mind as you choose the number of modules that your students will sit if you choose to go down that route. There is also an option of having an international A-level pure mathematics, and that one there, so without any applications, looks something like this one here. So they'll do the 4 compulsory modules there, and then they can choose they'll have to have the further pure 1 and then either further pure 2 or further pure 3, and then cash that in as well. So you have that. And just a quick reference without going into detail, because we're focusing on the international A level, but a quick reference to the further maths here. So if you look at this one, this slide here, if for the further maths, you have the further pure 1, further pure 2, further pure 3. And then you choose 3 of the applied modules. That's one way of combining the different modules. Or if you want, you can then choose further pure 1 and further pure 2 with 4 applied modules instead. And then there's also the option of having further pure 1, further pure 3, and then again 4 applied modules. So there is a choice there within that. We're not going to explore the further mathematics anymore, but that's a reference since I'm talking about the different modules that you could combine. So we also then look at the International AS Mathematics. So this is a course which consists of Pure 1, Pure 2, and 1 of the applied courses. And there's a similar arrangements for the AS Pure Mathematics and the AS Further Mathematics as well. And you can find more details about this if you go to the Edexcel website and in the specification document that I also showed you on the screen a few minutes ago. Now, a bit more about the details here. Now the specifications and the sums. So we have you can have a look at the sums papers, the key papers in when we produce them at the beginning of any new course, so that you have a full set of papers there. And since June 2019 onwards, you have also the past papers, as well as further specimen papers. And you can access all of those by clicking on the qualification website. You can download the slides as well for this, and then you can click on the link and go to that, or you can just search it online and you'll find that. So those are good to have a look at before you start, and perhaps use them as well, and keep the past papers for later on. So that's just a reference to that one. Now, the other thing that we should also be aware of is how does the international A-level continue from the international GCSE? You've got, as we said, 4 pure modules. The first one should have a natural progression from the GCSE, the international GCSE. When you start your pure 2, you should assume some knowledge from P1. P3 will have a combination of P1 and P2, and then P4 will have P1, P2, P3 as well. Now, for the applied modules, which is a bit more, it's important to be aware of this as you make a choice about the delivery, and we'll come back to that later on. The M1 assumes knowledge from P1, P2, and 2-dimensional vectors. The M2 assumes knowledge from P1, P2, P3, P4, and M1. And this is what I mean. So when you decide to deliver those modules, so some schools will do all the pure first and then the applied, some will cross between terms from one to the other. So being aware of what's required within each module, that allows a better transition and then less issues upon the delivery of it. So the fact that M1 assumes the knowledge of P1, P2, and that, the structure of how the teaching of each module, that should be taken into account, especially in the first year of the 2-year course. Similarly, you can see the statistics modules as well. S1 follows naturally from the international GCSE. S2 assumes knowledge of S1, You can see there's some differentiation and integration of polynomials, binomial coefficients in connection with the binomial distribution, and the evaluation of the exponential function. So again, you'd want to teach those first before going into S2. D1 follows naturally from the international GCSE. So having a reference and being aware of this then helps you structure term by term how you switch between the modules. And that's quite different between schools from my experience as well, both internationally and here in the UK. Now, if I look at the pure units, pure 1, for example, those are the topics that we cover. The assessment of pure 1 is by an externally set and externally marked examination consisting of about 10 questions. Other units, both pure and applied, have similar assessments. Those are the main headings. Algebra and function, though, has 12 sections. Now, on this point here, I should say that the assessments are constructed based on the specification and not by any textbook endorsed by either Pearson or anyone else. So it's based on the specification is what guides the examiners and not any specific textbook. So be aware of that and make sure you have a look at the specification and then map it against any textbook that you choose to use, because different textbooks from experience, they emphasize, they put different weight to different sections as well. So make sure you look at the specification and not just any textbook when you come to create either your schemes of work or whether you look at the textbooks and you prepare your students. I mentioned schemes of work. I'll come back to schemes of work later on within that. So as we've mentioned here, pure 1, that leads us to our first activity. And that's because when we talk about pure, if you have any experience with the assessment so far, you'll know that some questions are short and others are quite lengthy. An example of that one is this one here. So this is a short question. There are questions of 8 marks that can also appear. Now, what I'd like us to do is just spend about a minute or 2 minutes to just perhaps quickly solve or scribble on a paper near you, see how you would answer this, and then we'll have a quick discussion through the chat about any things to be aware of or misconceptions that can come up when solving something like this, because this is weighted, this has 4 marks. So I'll give you a minute, I'll be in the background, just a minute to have a quick look at this. So when we look at this question here, does anyone want to share any kind of issues that they've faced or experienced when students solve this? Because when you have a short answer like this, short question like this, you hope it's more straightforward and you'd want to make sure your students gain all the marks. In the chat, does anyone want to share of where they find, what kind of misconceptions they find, or where students lose their marks? I'll just give it a second. I'm just looking at the chat if anyone wants to. Now, something that costs students is the fact that they don't show all the workings, and they sometimes skip steps and then show the critical values. And then once they show the critical values, so they'll lose marks for not showing either the factorization method, and they'll just put the critical values there. Or another issue is they then don't show the correct ranges as well, and they get confused. So a reference to a sketch always helps, whether they do that sketch on the side or there, or if they even have any graphing technology with them, having a look at that and making sure they could do them. Yeah, someone mentioned also a sign is the problem as well, so putting the correct sign. They get confused also within as they solve an inequality, a linear inequality, and then when they come to a quadratic one here, the problem with that is they just leave the inequality, the sign like you mentioned as well. Rearranging the inequality and find the critical values include the equal sign in this case here. Good, another point here as well. Thank you for your contributions. Again, feel free to contribute at any point. If we then go just a quick one, we won't solve this one, but a quick reference to a wordy one is like the mechanics question here. This is a longer question. We won't go through that, but if you have a quick read of them and have a think about how the marks, the 6 marks for part A, what kind of steps and what kind of things they'd have to show to gain all 6 marks. So that's just if you look at that, it says find the magnitude of the frictional force exerted from the block by the panel and describe what happens to the block, justifying your answer. So there's an encouragement from the exam question itself for some reasoning there, and that's why it says justifying your answers as well. So they could include a good force diagram, resolve vertically and horizontally, and then use the formulas as well. And then they could support that with any statements on the side. And that's why there's 6 marks. It's encouraging them for showing steps as well along the way. Now, if I then move on to, we mentioned about the continuity between GCSE, international GCSE and international A-level. So, and I mentioned if you haven't got access to the resources right now to download them either from the resource button, but I think in the chat, if you scroll up, there's also a link that we could perhaps send again now for you to download them. So you'll need the delegate booklet as well as the qualification. So for the first one, it's just to make you more aware of how the international GCSE and the first module of Pure 1 on how where there's continuity and where the surprises for the students as well. So someone who has gone through the international GCSE and then comes on to the international A level, what kind of topics don't follow through and they're brand new, and it's just to make you aware of this. So if we look at what's on the actual sheet here, so I'll put the delegate one as well, but you'll need that yourselves, at least on the screens, and you can scribble. So if we go on to page, I think this is page 3. So activity 1 response sheet here, it contains, we have a copy, and you also need a copy of the specifications, which you can download through the link. Use both copies to write down any topics on the response sheet which you feel would be completely new to a student doing the P1 course if they had previously followed the international GCSE. So here's a few different sections here in topic from Pure 1. And just have a quick browse through the qualification, or if you are experienced with it, is it currently present in the international GCSE, yes or no, and any other comments that you'd like. I'll give you 5 minutes to then go through that yourself. So as I said, you'll need the the qualifications booklets as well. They're all attached to the resources. So if you know top of your head, you can just put that yourself, yes or no, in any comments. If not, refer back to this, and that just helps you become more familiar. So we'll go through this together in 5 minutes. So I'll just put back the instruction as well, which is here. So was it part of the international GCSE, yes or no, and any comments? I'll give you 5 minutes. It's past at my time here, so I'll give you 5 minutes and I'll come back to you and we can share some of the comments. Again, feel free to comment in the chat between you as well. just to ask if any person would like to me to give a few more minutes, or we can carry on. I had someone messaging as well. I'm happy to. We'll go through one or two. So if I just carry on with the sharing the screen. So here's a document we have here. So laws of indices for rational exponents. That is yes. So it's currently present in the international GCSE. User manipulation of surds. That's a yes as well. Quadratic functions and the graphs. That's also there. The discriminant of a quadratic function, that's not currently there. So that's that one there's not there, the discriminant. Someone else mentioned it as well. Completing the square solutions of a quadratic equation. That's a yes. Solve simultaneous equations, analytical solutions by substitution. That's a yes. The 1.7, interpret linear and quadratic inequalities. Graphically, the 1.7. That one there is yes, but partly. Regions defined by linear inequalities there. Represent linear and quadratic inequalities graphically. Again, it's partly yes. Regions defined again by linear inequalities we have. Solutions of linear and quadratic inequalities. The linear part is a yes. Some easy quadratics on the Edexcel International GCSE. So we expect slightly more challenging ones in the international A-level. Algebraic manipulation of polynomials, including expanding brackets and collecting like terms factorization, the 1.10, that is a yes. If 1.11, which is graphs of functions, sketching curves defined by simple equations, geometrical interpretation of algebraic solution of equations, use of points of intersections of graphs to solve equations. So that one there, that's yes, but partly. Sketching is not part of the Edexcel International GCSE, so that's the bit that's different. Knowledge, so 1.12, knowledge of the effect of simple transformations on the graph, such as the ones that are mentioned there. That's a yes. This next one, equations of a straight line, we tend to, as teachers, show the other forms of the linear equation. However, for the international GCSE, it only requires y equals mx plus c. So the other things are usually, I would say, good practice, in my opinion, that we prepare them for that. Conditions of two straight lines to be parallel or perpendicular to each other, that's a yes. The sine and cosine rules, including the ambiguous case of the sine rule and the area of a triangle in the form of half AB sine C, that's yes, partly though, not that ambiguous case, that's not in the international GCSE. The radian measure, including use of arc length and arc the area of the sector, that is a no, so that's not part of that one. So then 3.3, sine, cosine, and tangent functions, the graphs, symmetries, and periodicity, that is a yes. We then go to the derivative of f of x as a gradient of the tangent to the graph of y equals fx. At a point, the gradient of the tangent as a limit, interpretation as a rate of change, second order derivatives. That one is a yes, but expect more sophisticated questions and treatment in the international A-level. And then we have differentiation of x to the power of n and related sums, differences, and constant multiples. Yes, partly. We're referring to the slight difference there with the fractional and negative indices. And then applications of differentiation to gradients, tangents, and normals. That's yes, partly. The gradients, the part there is what is slightly different. And then integration, that is completely new. That's a no for the international GCSE. So those were the kind of the answers and for this task here. Now, what's important, and the reason why we've looked into this task here, is that Pearson has spent quite a bit of time and tries to give a good emphasis in the transition from the GCSE to A level. Now, if you have, I'm aware of someone's put a question on something specific about inequalities. If you remind me at the end, we could look at that depending on time. But if I go back to this task that we've just did here, if you have any concerns or any other feedback about the transition between that, feel free to put that in the text and we'll share that with the maths team as well, because they do try to ensure that there's a nice transition between the two courses, and hence why there's a lot of yeses within those points, especially for P1. So if we move now to the next part of this course here, and that's about the teaching of the international A-level mathematics. Now, there's different things to consider when you come to teach the international A-level, like any other course. And some of it are some of the things that you should be aware of, consider, or issues that can come up from it are to do with the actual classroom and the teacher choices. Some of them have to do with the qualification in itself and the structure of it, and that's why it's good to be aware of the order and the structure that you'd have to teach them, or if you choose to change the order, any prerequisites that you need to do. And then there's also some organizational awareness, or that will either give you the flexibility or the constraints as well. When I say organization, we're talking about the school or the trust of schools if you're part of a big organization, and sometimes that gives you some restrictions that then restrain you from making all the choices that you want. So if we look at one by one here, and again, feel free to comment or join in at any point about this through the chat, please. And I'm happy to then elaborate on any points that you share as well. So issues you should consider when teaching, some of which are cultural specific as well. The classroom layout, can you arrange the desks to suit your teaching style? I mean, within my team here at the school, we're a team of about 13 teachers. You'll walk around the department and you'll notice that some are teaching face from the front mostly. There's more teacher talk. You'll see rows of tables. In other ones, you'll see a U shape. In other ones, you'll see groups of 4 or 2 tables joined together. And in other ones, other classes are kind of taught in a computer class where there's a combination of between using technology as well, and sometimes they adapt between them. So there's a very different. There's a variety of teaching styles, and they can all be effective. So there's not a preference of one over the other. It's what fits yourselves together with your students, and then it's trying to get the best out of your students in that kind of teaching style. Now again, each one has drawbacks and advantages within that, but things to consider is that style. There is a consistency between the teachers, or in the way that the order of the topics that they follow, as well as some department, in our case, the policies that we have in place. And some of that is the frequency on the homework. It's about whether we all use folders for the A level. It's about whether they use exercise books and the presentation and the order. And then we have some policies within that. You might have more autonomy within that as a teacher in your school, or there might be some of the things that you do as well. The different layouts as well encourage discussions in some of the cases. Some are better than others. Sometimes it's also helpful with the management of behavior and how you engage with the students. So those are things to consider. If you have a smart screen, that helps a lot. But so are you, or is it just a projector? In some cases, you don't have a projector, you just have a whiteboard. In other cases, sorry. In other cases, you might only have access to a textbook or exercise books. Again, the way that you deliver is very different. And again, the activities that you then use, and there's not one better than the other. There's advantage, and it's about making it fit with yourself. Do you have access to the internet? Some people have it access all the time. In some cases, in schools now in the UK, you'll find a lot of the sixth forms have tablets or access to laptops. Does your school have access to that as well? Because there's a lot of online activities that you can use. If that's not the case, do the students access mobile phones, and what's the policy of your school with that? Those again are things that affect the choices of the delivery of the qualification? Do you have access to graphic technology, whether that's online with the use of different platforms, or do you have graphic calculators access to that? Again, the choices of the activities that you make will be affected by those options. What type of exercise books do you use, or do you want students to work on just file paper? And if it's just file paper, is there a structure? Some students will need a bit more boundaries, let's say, and structure in terms of if they're using an exercise book where they're meant to take out the paper, do they organize it in folders? Some students will find it difficult to do that if someone doesn't structure that. So that's again, and to the folders, if they use that, are they sectioned by module, by topic? Are they sectioned by teacher? And where do they put the homework? Is that a separate to the teaching that you do, or does that come together? And the same with any assessments that you do. Do they come in and do they put them together with the actual topics that you taught in the homework, or do they have a separate section? All of this is good to think about and consider before you even start, so that you can structure and help students organize themselves as they come into becoming more independent, and also not just for the international A level, but then in the future when they go into a university or any other course that they might take on afterwards. Assuming English is the language of instruction, how well do your students understand the spoken and written words? We had a lot of emphasis in my school, for example, of going from the everyday speaking English to the more academic language. And a lot of that discussions I will have, or references, would be that when a student tries to articulate their understanding in an everyday way of spoken language, is how can I get them to reiterate that, or how can I get them to structure grammatically as well as using the right vocabulary in the way that they reason and in the way that they explain the mathematics. And that we find that has a significant effect on the way that they answer the questions in the papers as well, because using the right vocabulary, whether that's command words, whether that's describing what's happening, they're then able to understand what the question says, but also when they come to reason as well. So considering the audience that you have, the layout that you have, whether that allows those discussions as well, and that's one way of building that confidence as well. And like we mentioned here, we take it that English is the language of instruction. So thinking about that and encouraging and improving the students' language, then that supports them from accessing the assessments as well when it comes to them sitting the exams. Now, if I move from the teaching from the classroom, things that you should consider to perhaps the content as well. A few things here that you should consider is how much prior learning can you assume? Are all the students your own students, or are you teaching in a college or a sixth form that accepts external students as well? How do you find out what the gaps are, and how do you address them as you teach? What textbooks should you use? And again, there's a choice between them all, but then it's looking and referring back to first of all the specification, then the assessments, and are the exam style, do they offer exam style questions within that? Is the challenge of the questions within the textbook similar or above the one of the assessments? If it's lower, then that's something to be aware of, so that you can then make sure that you upskill the students and bring them to that level where they can access the assessment. So it's looking at that as well, because if you're going to be using topic assessments at the end of each topic, that's fine. But if you're going to be using homework from a textbook, then you want to ensure that you have confidence in that textbook, that they bring you to that same level as the assessment, so that you are confident that as you are teaching along, you are helping the students and guiding them. Another thing to consider when you're choosing the right textbooks: does the textbook give opportunities to refer back to previous topics, Or do you have to do that? Because if it doesn't, you should be mindful of that and review and come back and reflect on that. Because as you know, students will forget. Now, the nature of the mathematics in itself, and you should know that from experience, is that it builds on by topics, and there's a good opportunity of interlinking topics. But you want to have faith that when you sit and you set some homework, that also supports them and encourages them to go back as well. And that then will help them retain knowledge, and then when they need to refer back to that, they'll be able to as well. How often should you be testing learning? There is that trade-off between the more tests you do, the more time out you take from the teaching. So that you need to consider that. There is an advantage of doing more assessments. You get to keep a track of how much they know, and you can also alert them when there's gaps, and you can deal with them. But however, the more assessments you do, the more time out you do for the assessments. But then behind every assessment, any gaps you have, you're going to have to deal with them as well, and perhaps reteach certain topics as well. So that takes time as well. There are ways around each one of them. Perhaps that when identifying gaps, you don't always have to necessarily reteach within the lesson, but you could set some revision tasks, or you could set some work. And there's plenty of websites online where they offer free videos where you can assign, if students have access to this, of course, or if they have access to computers within your school or your infrastructure there, they could perhaps have some time where they can go and revise it. If not, maybe certain books that you can refer back to, or perhaps you can print some worksheets. Again, it's very different between every school that are around the world and the access of resources, but there is plenty of that, and again, the choices that you'll make is based on the accessibility that you have as well. The other one here is, should you write your own tests? I mean, bespoke tests are always worth, as long as you've got experience and you can match those. Writing your own tests means that you can write it based on what audience you have in front of you. However, that's also time consuming for yourselves. There's also the risk that you either make them easier or harder. The harder in itself can be demoralizing if the students can access them. The easier is also is an issue as well, because if you never upskill the students to the level of the examination itself, then they might be thrown off as well. There are plenty of resources out there and assessments. I'm also going to refer to the support section at the end, where we talk about the exam wizard, if you're not familiar with it, and how you can create your own assessments from that as well. So those are things to consider. And again, do you have the autonomy for making your own, or is there a department one? And if the department's assessments are not fit for purpose, Right, apologies for that. We had a technical issue with the, I'm at school myself right now, and we had an issue with the Wi-Fi quickly. So we should be back now. And can I just have a thumbs up if you can see the slides again? Just having a look if anyone can verify that. Oh. Are we able to see that? Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thanks for the people who answered that. So if I go back to, okay, then I got a few yeses in the text. Sorry, I'm just, okay. So if I go back to the question I was posing, do you assess students with a baseline assessment when they join, they start the course? And if yes, what do you use? Can we just share that in our chat quickly, please? So as students come into your school or as you start the course, do you do a baseline assessment? If not, if yes, do you create your own, or is there any particular one that you use? Just to mention as well with the baseline assessments, there are some you can find also on the Emporium website. If you're not aware of the Emporium website, I'll mention it at the support section because that's free to use as well and offered to all the schools that use Pearson as well. So that's something to be aware of if you'd like to use that. The other thing I should mention while we're talking about the content as well is sometimes there's more than one teacher as well. So things to consider is how do you split the year 12 course between two teachers? And again, it depends on the number of students you have and the strengths of each teacher as well. So those are some factors to consider as well. Coming into that, so that I'm referring to the organizational one. How often schools should set homework and how much? Some schools have a policy behind that where it kind of limits the amount of homework. So you've got if you're doing parallel teaching at the same time, do you do that? Do you set the homework the same week, or do you alternate as well? Those are some things to consider. What is the expectation? So some schools do you mark every single piece of homework? Some of them will do peer marking and self-assessment, and then they'll take it in. And some teachers will also refer back to common misconceptions or issues based on the homework as a starter activity in the next lesson. So you'll have a variety between different schools that will do different approaches as well. And does your school college have an examination week? So is it then a mock week, as some will call it? Do they do that? How frequent is it? Some schools will do one in year 12 and one in year 13. I'm referring to all, that's AS basically, the first year of the A level, and then the second year level they'll do another mock before the exams. Some will do two as well. So they'll do two mock series within that year group and two in the following year. Again, there's a trade-off that the more that you do, the more teaching time you take off as well. But that's things to consider when you come to plan it. And if there's any requirements of how much content you have to assess as well. When sharing a course between two teachers, how do you split the content? So sometimes you'll see people doing pure and some of the applied. Sometimes they'll do half the pure, one of the applied, the other pure, and the other applied as well. So you'll have that example. In other cases, again, depends on the number of teachers who are experienced to teach the international A level and how big your school is. Someone will teach the whole thing as well. And in each case, if you have two teachers doing the same time, someone doing the applied, the other one pure, again, it's looking at the qualification and the prerequisites that we mentioned at the beginning of this session, and thinking about the order that you do it and when do they start teaching the applied, so that you teach all the required prior knowledge first. So those are some of the choices that you'd have to consider. How much teaching time do you have? In some schools, they'll have 1 hour per day, so they'll have 5 hours a week. In other schools, they'll have, let's say, a big 2-hour block or a 3-hour block, and they'll only have 2 of them in the whole week, and there'll be more sets. And again, those choices, some of them you will not have the flexibility or the option because it's based on your school. There are some research out there that you can read about the frequency that you come back to content, because the bigger the chunk you have, the more chances you have to actually explore more or go deeper within. But then you need to also be aware that you don't visit, that you don't see them as often. So therefore, you need to make sure you cover the content. In other cases, though, the more often you see them, the more you get to revisit quickly and build upon knowledge as well. So there's the way that the session is structured, you should consider how you teach it as well, because there are advantages and disadvantages with each one. And I'm not suggesting one over the other, but the approach is important in the way that you're allowed to do based on your school. So those are some of the things to consider. So we've got different issues and different things to be aware of in terms of the classroom teaching, in terms of the qualification, and then in terms of the organization as well. And that all affects the way that the qualification is delivered, and then how you get the students ready for this. Something more about the organizational issues here. Showing the first year of the course between 2 teachers, here's a possible model that you could follow. Term 1 share of Pure 1. Teacher A does algebra, functions, and coordinate geometry. Teacher B does trigonometry, differentiation, and integration. Term 2, the teacher A does mechanics 1. Teacher B does Pure 2. Term 3, we have revision of Pure 1, 2, and Mechanics 1 past papers. That is just an example of how a school has delivered the Year 12 teaching. This then moves us into our activity 2, which you'll also find in your delegate booklet. So again, referring back to the delegate booklet there, and activity 2 says, this asks you to consider the issues raised in previous slides, so in terms of the teaching, organizational, and the content. Look at each of the slides in turn and consider what other points you should have to think about when teaching the course. So it's a nice reflective activity just for a few minutes. You can chat, you can put comments in the chat as well. Use chat to add anything you feel that has been omitted within the slides here. So I'll give you about 4 minutes to have a look. So the key points are on the actual sheet. So I'll show you. So if we go back to that delegate booklet as well, just to make sure everyone's there. So, and I'll put down here in case you have in case you don't have access to it for whatever reason, that's what people should be seeing. So issues you have considered when teaching, some of which are cultural specific. Those are the points I mentioned, the content coverage, and then the organization. Reflect, maybe put a comment next to each one, and then perhaps add any other comments that you want as well. So I'll give you about 4 to 5 minutes on this, and then we'll carry on. Thank you. I hope that was enough time for you to reflect. Okay, thank you for the people who made comments. The choice of when to assess students is up to yourselves. You can have a look online and the specification. So as I said earlier on, and I'll come into assessments in a few minutes actually, and I'll go more into depth. Some choose to follow it like a linear model where they sit everything at the end, and others break it throughout throughout the 2-year course. And I'll come back into those questions there as well. So I hope that was useful. And again, if you want to ask anything else specific about the way of delivering, or if you have any problems about that, feel free to send an email to us or any message again, and then happy to then discuss it as well. There's not one way for all. It's based on your, like I said, based on the school, based on the actual country, and based on the school, the policies that they have, as well as the type of students you have in front of you. So that's what affects the choices when you come to delivering it. The other thing to consider as well, you want to make sure that you deliver in the content of the international A-level, but you can always access resources from the A-level as well. And therefore supplement the stuff that you do within in your classroom. There's a lot of resources, and I do the same when I come to teach the A-level in mathematics here. I'll drop into international resources as well, so I can do a bit of variety. Sometimes I like certain questions that they've asked in that. You just need to make sure you're aware of the specification, and it's not something outside it. Talking about the specification, I mentioned schemes of work earlier. Now, whether you're a single teacher taking all the lessons, or whether the teaching is shared, a scheme of work is essential. It enables progression, so the ideas are presented in the correct order. It also allows you to make sure you've done the mapping between the specification as well as the textbooks that you have. It enables the course to be taught in a timely manner, so you kind of refer to guided how many hours you want based on the timetable that you have in your school, because the lessons vary between others do 45-minute lessons, 60 lessons, 75-minute lessons, and some even do a double lesson as well. So again, being aware of that and adapting your scheme of work to reflect that's essential. So that, because it helps you make sure you can cover the whole specification. And if there are assessment weeks or examination weeks, such as mocks, you want to make sure that that's also kind of included within your scheme of work, so that you allow some reteaching time, and you also make sure that you'll finish in time to do some revision at the end and prepare them for any. And if you're doing a unitary kind of approach, you want to make sure that you have that in mind in your schemes of work, so that you know that at that point, and this is what I was saying earlier on, you're stopping the teaching because they're doing an examination, then you're carrying on as well, or you're finishing for each module at the right timing. And that's something to consider when you build your scheme of work and you put this together. It enables collaboration between teachers if the course is shared. Having a scheme of work, you are able to put your initials next to each one, or you're able to see how and when within the term the other teacher starts, or the modules, the order of the modules, so that if there are prerequisites or requirements from the other module, you know that they were taught. In some cases, there will be teachers who will take on certain parts of the topics as they start teaching the other modules, to make sure it's covered, or they remind the students of things that they were taught by the other teacher as well. It enables testing to take place in a methodical approach. So it's that overseeing the calendar, let's say. So it's when you build the scheme of work, you have the calendar of the school in mind, together with the timetable of the day and the period, how long the periods are. And this way, you're able to structure it and ensure that you meet the requirements of the qualification, but you have the students prepared at the right timings as well. Here's an example of some of the things I mentioned here in this next slide. Some teachers prefer to design their own schemes of work or use the maths department. I want to reflect local priorities. So some of the some of the priorities might be academic ones, but there's also some national days that you should be mindful of, or because that affects the order that the time that you have as well. Edexcel has produced a model scheme of work, and that's again in the Maths Emporium, or there's also in the qualification website that you can download. And here's an example. So the teaching time for each topic, they say about 4 hours for powers and surds. The prior knowledge needed is also mentioned. So for example, here, collecting like terms and factorizing, and any keywords that they should be familiar with. So that's also mentioned here. So it's worth having that in mind. If you also look at the, we always try to update our schemes of work, and sometimes also have links to other things such as technology, which I'll mention later on. So if you do have access to a screen or a projector, you might want to use some of the technology, not just the graphic technology, but some GeoGebra files or other things else. We'll link them usually with that as well. And that's something to look out for as well, and see if you want to use. So then when we talk about the different topics, and when you produce your other ones, there's sometimes there's some specific examples within our scheme of work as well. Here's an example of that, and you can mention and you can add to that as well if you download the Word document. So you have your teaching objectives. So example, use and manipulate SERS, rationalize the denominator. Give me 1 second, sorry. Sorry about that. There's some teaching points, so make sure students can square 2 root 3 correctly. And again, there's some misconceptions to consider here. So when they square 2 root 3, it's about whether they put the brackets in the square, whether they square both terms as well. There's a few things there that, you know, and you could assess as well. There's some really free, good websites free as well, which are aligned with different qualifications of ours, where you can have multiple choice answers. And if you have access to mini whiteboards or something like that, you can assess the misconceptions and you can discuss and treat them. Some of those misconceptions might be found within the homework as well. So it's bearing that in mind. So some of those are mentioned in the scheme of work, but from your own experience, you can add a few more as well as you go ahead. Another one, for example, is if you have 2x over 2 root x, and what the answer would be that, and how students would approach that problem. Again, it's finding those out, and then it's also making sure that you give enough practice to students for them to come up here, because some teachers would be worried and stressed to cover all the content and not giving enough time for students to go into practicing all that. There's some really nice resources which again are available free online, where they offer variation. When we talk about variation, is where you have a similar topic, similar kind of nature of the questions, but they change slightly as you go along. And it allows students to make those links themselves and understand those type of questions. Worksheets are really nice. If you just search online for variation on the topic that you want, you'll find some free resources on that as well. Opportunities for reasoning and problem solving. Again, we have the fluency that we're teaching. And we want to make sure that every student understands key concepts from it. But then we also need to allow them to be able to justify, like those questions that we saw earlier on, where it says, show your justification. Exact answers involving Pythagoras as well, how they leave their answers at the end. Common misconception, like I mentioned earlier. So it's being aware and bringing all that in a scheme of work. You can kind of bring out key things so that as a teacher leaves or another teacher picks up, they can then refer to and share that. And those are great opportunities as well in department meetings, if you ever meet together, to also discuss the maths. And another point here is when you look at your exam results at the end, and I'll come back to that in the next section. When you look at the exams results, it'll be nice to have a look at what areas of the maths the majority of the students lost marks in. And is that just because of it being challenging, not accessible, or is it a topic that perhaps you want to discuss a different approach to? And I'll come back and refer to this when I talk about the assessments and the support materials as well. So that again brings us on to the next section here, which is assessing the international A-level mathematics. Again, like I mentioned earlier on, it is not any textbook that guides or decides what should be assessed, but it's actually the specification, which is why it's important to always refer back to at least once every now and then, and make sure that what you teach, if it's based on a textbook or based on some worksheets that you've done in the past, are they mapped correctly? So assessment objectives, which are related to teaching objectives, are what guides the assessment as well. Okay, and I'll mention that in the next few slides. So like I mentioned earlier on, each unit is assessed through a 90-minute examination paper. The examination paper is constructed by a senior examination team. The experienced examiners, most of whom are practicing or retired teachers or lecturers, then put this together. The rules for constructing examination papers are strict. There should be sufficient content must be present in each paper. All content must be examined over a period of papers. No content must be said which is not in the specification. And the 5 assessment objectives, which I'll refer to in the next slide, must all be tested in each assessment. The demand of successive papers should be roughly the same. And if it's not, I'll explain again the approach that the examining body has towards that. So I mentioned the 5 assessment objectives. So these are the following. So this describes how the content is to be examined in the international A-level mathematics. And there are 5 assessment objectives which are different to the normal A-level mathematics that they have in the UK. So if anyone's familiar with that one, these are different, and these are guide them slightly different as well. So these are, you can see them on the screen now. So assessment objective 1, recall, select, and use knowledge of facts, concepts, and techniques. Assessment objective 2, construct rigorous arguments and proofs. Number 3, recall, select, and use knowledge of mathematical models. Number 4, comprehend translations of realistic context into mathematics. And 5, use calculated technology and other permitted resources accurately. Now, the marks assigned to each assessment objective are different in some units. We'll explore this further in our module 2 of this course, which is coming up later on this month. The other thing to mention is that in assessment objective 1 in pure 1 are only allowed to deviate narrowly from a target in each paper, and that's to ensure the consistency of what is being tested. And again, I'll cover this more in module 2. If I then move on, a marker can submit difficult mark questions to a team leader. So let's have a look at how this is being marked. The examination paper marking team consists of experienced practicing or retired teachers, like I mentioned earlier, managed by team leader who themselves are responsible to a senior examiner. To ensure a fairness of marking, each examination script is scanned and electronically split into each question. So it's marked by different examiner. Marking takes place in a private in the examiner's home, or marking is confidential, and each examiner must adhere to the detailed mark scheme. The marking is monitored and corrected if necessary by senior examiner. And like I mentioned at the start, a marker can submit a difficult mark to a team leader to then go over and have a look at. Now, let's have a look a bit more how the marks are allocated and what do they mean. If you look, we look at this example here from January 2023 from Pure 2. At this stage, I'd also like to mention at the bottom here in brackets, you have solutions relying entirely on calculated are not accessible. So I'd like to mention here that if they put some answer straight away from the calculator without showing sufficient working, they're not awarded those marks, especially when that sentence comes up. When that's not there, they could be leniencies towards, but if that's there, that immediately means that they cannot get the marks. And we'll have a look at that in a minute. So in this case here, they can use the calculator for the NCR button to find the Pascal's coefficients. But there's other ways that they could have used it to gain more working marks. So if we look at the marks, because that shows us a bit more about how this is distributed, you can see that in the first question here, you have an M1 mark, the method mark that they have to show that, and then that's followed by B1, A1, and A1 here. The second part of the question, though, you can see there's 2 method marks. And in this case here, they would not get the second method mark if they don't get the first one. So they have to get the first, dependent on the first method mark being given. And the accuracy mark won't be given unless the first 2, unless they show the method marks there. And that's because it goes back to it mentions what I said earlier on about the technology. Now, understanding how the mark schemes are given, by the way, if you download any of the past paper mark schemes and you look at the front page, it also gives you the symbols and what they mean as well. So the next activity now that we have, activity here, it's again in your delegate booklet. You get, you'll see this, and I'll put that up. You get the answers of 2 students. So 2 students answered that question, which I'll put back on the screen as well. And in your delegate booklet, you also get the mark scheme as well. So you've got the question. So, and then you'll have the 2 students responding to part A and part B. You get the method marker there, and then on the last sheet there on your delegate booklet, you'll have, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in case you don't have the booklet as well, but you kind of need this for this one. So here are 2 student responses to question 3 from January 23, Pure 1. Use the attached mark scheme to mark the responses. The question is also there. So then you've got, you can get your M marks, correct method marks. You have the marks that cannot be awarded unless the previous mark was awarded, and then the accuracy marks. So on the last, if you look at the work, what they've done, and then look at the mark scheme here, on this last sheet here, can you write down next to each point? So there's student response A, response B, and then the student B, response A, part B. Can you give, do they gain the mark or do they not? So have a look at your delegate booklet and the answers against this. And then I'll put the question back on there. So let me just put that on there for you to see. Then have a look at the mark scheme and the answers. One second. Here we go. So we have the question. If you look at the answers as well, please, that the students have recorded, and then decide whether they should gain those marks, and then we'll discuss it. So on this part here, I will give you slightly more time so you can reflect and go back and forward and see that. So I'll give you about 8 minutes to work on this, and then we'll go through and see whether you were right or wrong. And you'll find that even when I do this task with my team here, we don't always agree with this. However, we have to all follow what the mark says, and that's what the examiners need to do. So it's not, sometimes you might think, oh, I don't agree with this, but you have to follow what the mark scheme says. So I'll give you 8 minutes here from now to work on this one. Thank you to everyone who's completed the task. I'll give you a last minute just to conclude, and we'll go through and see if we all agree. Right. Some people are already sharing their answers, so feel free to share that. So the first one, so if I show you, it's in the delegate booklet again, remember? So if I show you the working here, this is the part A of student A. This task here, I would, what the student actually got, they received 4 marks. Method shown on all required terms, and they're correct. So they got all 4 marks for that one. The second one, though, so part B, so this case here, the student received 2 marks. So we condone the omission of equals to 0 for the equation, but k equals to 0 must be rejected. So as I was saying, k equals 0 must be rejected as an answer, as it contradicts the statement in line 1 of the question. So they had to show that the reject k equals 0. If they didn't, they lose the mark, and they lost the mark here. If we move to student B, so that's it here, that should have been rejected there. If we look at the student B, we've got this student here actually received 2 marks. We can see the method, so it's shown. But second term, it's not fully simplified, which means that they get 0. B for the B mark, they get 0. The binomial coefficients for the third and the fourth term are simplified, so that's why they get the A1. But then the coefficients have not been fully simplified, which is why they get, sorry, I'm looking at part A still, which is why they get the A naught. And they get, yeah, for not rejecting 0, they lose a mark for that one in the previous part. So for this one here, though, so part B, that student only receives 1 mark. So we have a correct equation, but then incorrectly simplified. And so the error of method, so it's not a numerical error, it's a method, which then implies that's why they lose that method mark. And then from that, the values of k are not correct, so they lose a second accuracy. So there's a method mark that's lost there, and then an accuracy mark that's lost as well. And that's how they're answered. Now, what I would suggest, and I'll come, because we're going to go into the support materials in a few minutes, is, and I do this with my team here and with other schools that we collaborate, this is a really good task with your own students. So if you work within a team or within your own class, what I would suggest is, because when you come to mark your assessments and your mocks, you want to make sure you're in line with what the examiners do. So if you when it comes to the exams, you have a period afterwards that you're allowed to download for free the scripts of your own students. You'll need permission for that, but you can either write a letter to the students' parents to sign, or you can get the permission by the student and then download them. And when you download them, you can have a look and see where the marks are actually being attributed there and against what you would do. So you could just hide and see that. And you can see a top student within your class, a middle and a low. So you can then see the type of mistakes they do, and they can see how the marks are allocated, so that you make sure that your judgments are aligned with the examiners. The other thing you could do that we offer on the Maths Emporium is we have, after each of the examinations, we especially the last few years ones, we actually give you examiners reports with examples of this. I would take this, remove the marks and work as a team and start giving them. And then you can then have a look and see if you've given the same, and then read the examiner's report at the bottom to see why that's not the case, or why is that the case if you agree with it. So those are some really nice tasks that I would suggest you either do in September when you first start, or the best time to do that when there's a bit more relaxed after the examinations, the examination period. So once your international GCSE, international A was finished, and you have that time period where you prepare for the following year, that's a nice task to then do based on last year's one. The only reason I mentioned this year's one, and again, maybe after every, because if you do different modules throughout the year, once you get the resources from it, then perhaps you can offer some time to do that. It just means that you are aware of how the marks are attributed against that, and make sure that when you do your own mocks with the following year group, you're then marked the same way as well. So those are just some of them, the tasks that I was mentioning. So again, if you want to go back to at any point, the actual answers to that are on, they're on this slide here. So you can see where they were given. Now, just a final thing about the assessments. Arriving to a final grade, the raw mark for each of the 6 units is converted to a mark which is on the uniform mark scale, UMS. And you'll see that within the grade boundaries as well. The purpose of the UMS is to take into account the relative difficulty of each unit as evidenced by the distribution of raw marks on that unit. So it's when we talked about they try to have the difficulty the same. However, that doesn't always happen. And if it's slightly different, they'll then correct us with this. So a difficult paper, say paper 1, may have a grade A boundary at 56 marks. Whereas an easier one would be on a paper 3 might be at 60 marks. A student who got 56 on paper 1 and 60 on paper 3 will have the same UMS out of 80 on each paper. The final grade is found by adding all 6 UMS. So a grade A would be 480 out of the possible 600. And that's the procedure they do for them to make sure that they're aligned in terms of difficulty. Now, the final section for today's session is to just refer to some support resources as well as websites, and make sure you're familiar. And if you're not familiar at any point, there are videos on the Pearson qualification website as well as YouTube, where you can watch and see in more detail. You can ask for one of us to help you as well, but there'll also be an email that you can send for any of this. So I'll go through a few of them and make sure you're aware of them and what you could do with this. First of all, the resources that we have are categorized between the planning and teaching and learning of the qualification, exam preparation and assessment, and then the results support that you have afterwards. And then you can see how on this slide here, you've got different things here from training events, advisor support, the schemes of work we mentioned before, so the sample assessments, examination reports. So we split them into 3 categories, and even on the qualification website, you'll see the different tabs as well that you can then click and see the resources. And there's more that keep coming as we go along. And then it's worth emailing as well, because from my experience as well, when I started with Pearson, before I was a credit world specialist, one reason I worked with them closely is because things that I wanted or required and they didn't have, an email and a communication with them, they seem to then adapt and create resources that were supported. So they do different, they'll do different surveys afterwards and see, is what I'm suggesting or asking for them popular as well within the teaching community? And if that's the case, then they'll spend resources, time and money to build them and create them. So it's worth emailing and communicating if there's something else that you want. I mentioned the teaching qualification website, so that's the one there that you can see. There's a number of resources that are available on the website. The web page illustrates has 4 tabs that you can see: the specification and sample assessment materials, exam materials, the documents including past papers, mark scheme, and examiners' reports, forms and administration documents to help with admin. And then you have the teaching and learning materials as well, which include more exemplars, lesson plans, course planners, and much more. And then they continually keep adding on this bank of resources. Okay, so it's worth keep visiting. You'll see a new word new next to it as well, that kind of tells you that. And the latest resources, they usually, especially with past papers, they'll also lock them as well, so you'll need a login, and that's so that it doesn't get linked to students way before you want to use them as well. The next thing I would mention, and this goes back to what I mentioned earlier with assessments, the results plus, it's a free service where you get to see the performance of your school. So it's a free online service to Pearson Edexcel centers. It provides teachers and students with a deep insight into their exam performance. And this, what we do with our students, take their exam in a traditional paper-based way. Those papers are then sent to central processing centers and scanned through a series of clever machines. Electronic copies are then sent electronically to examiners. This allows us to send particular questions from the same paper to be sent to different examiners depending on their expertise. They are marked to a screen digitally. We can then consolidate to all digital data onto a central system, and which is where you have access to. And you get to find the best, let's say 10 topics, the worst topic for 10 topics of your students. You can see it by class if you feed that information in. You can see it by the whole cohort as well. And then from there, this is where I was mentioning earlier on, you can get to reflect and see, do you need to rethink about teaching something differently? Okay, so that's something to consider, and it's a good platform to use, especially after each of the examinations, and then rethink, do I have to make things differently with my next year group? Do I need to have some CPD on a certain topic? Do I need to exchange ideas of how to teach certain topics? Maybe perhaps change the resources, or maybe I need an assessment right after this topic because I didn't do well. So those are things to consider after you look at your results plus, and they could be different by school and by class as well. So those are just a few of the features I mentioned earlier on. This then moves us to the exam wizard. So the exam wizard here, it's a free tool for teachers, which you might find useful in producing exercises and past papers for students to use for study or in the classroom test. Exam wizard uses questions from past papers, so the bank of potential questions increases with each series to produce bespoke questions or question papers depending on what teachers are selecting to test. So when we talked about making a bespoke paper earlier, Exam Wizard is a nice tool for you to use. You can make topic assessments. You can make a different mock examination, a mock kind of paper that covers only the assessments, that the topics that you want. This helps you create a mark scheme, but also the examiner's report as well. So it's worth using as well. I find this very useful for me and my team upon delivering this qualification. And finally, the other thing to mention is the access to script online portal. So it's a self-service, online, free, and instant from results day onwards. Sorry. Pearson service cuts down on speculative ERs. So what I would like to mention here, this service allows you to see all your students' marked exam papers free of charge. It is available free for all qualifications and will be accessed through the Edexcel Online website. So you'll need a login for that. Note that the scripts do not have examiners' annotations on them, just the marks. And Pearson Edexcel, we are the only awarding organization to offer this service for free of charge for all our qualifications. You can use the access to script service alongside Resource Plus, so you can actually see then why you got the 10 top performing topics or the worst top just by scrutinizing them, the scripts as well. And if you use both of these services, they'll help you identify any gaps and then consider any different teaching approaches and making sure that those gaps are not repeated in the following year. Okay, so that's a few things that you need to you could use and consider with this one here. The other thing I would like to mention, there are some additional paid resources that we produce, and those are the student books with Active Learn books, so that we match the student books against the active books as well. However, again, that's only optional, and It's whether if you want to, there's other providers as well, so you don't need to have necessarily the ones that we recommend. Some published resources are just to share as well that for the qualification here. They're designed for anyone following the latest Pearson Edexcel International mathematics teachers and learners who want the best preparation for the exams, exam success, and for them to be able to progress themselves. So these are some of the books here. They can support you with a modular approach in line with the latest specification. And they're fully comparable to the UK reformed A-levels as well. You can click on the link here at the bottom here. And from that, you can get access to some of the resources. The other thing that we wanted to mention that I said, if I don't answer some of your questions here, we do have a dedicated team. So like myself, there's a team of people here that can help you. So if Mark Heslop leads the maths team for the international team here, and then you can email and he'll reply to you using the email address that you can see on there. You can also contact the Pearson as well using that number there. And of course, you can also use the form online through the contact us to ask any subject specific or any other support that's more specific to your context as well. At this point here, we've got a few minutes left. I'm going to say if anyone wants to ask any questions, put them in the chat. I'll be available for the next 10 minutes to answer any question that you have. Some of the things are very specific to your school. It might be worth sending the email so then we can talk to you directly or call. And then if there's anything to do with this session here, my name is Melios Michael, one of the credible specialists. You can refer to this session as well. And again, any feedback that you give us as well will help us for future sessions that we do. So I'll be in the background for a few minutes, and I'll be looking at the chat to see if to answer any of your questions as well. If you don't have any questions at this point, I'd like to say thank you for joining us and have a great day, and looking forward to seeing you in the second part of this module. So I'll be in the background for anyone who has any questions. Thank you.